The wedding dress looked like a relic from another century. Lace yellowed at the edges, hem caked with dust, sleeves too long for her thin, freckled wrists. Eleanor Walker stood alone at the edge of the altar, her spine straight despite the weight of 60 years and the silence of 100 watching eyes. The groom was gone. No note, no explanation, just a trail of boot prints in the dirt and a town full of whispers already turning to laughter. Someone spat into the dirt near the church steps. A young man muttered, "Too old for even desperation," and the chuckle that followed rolled through the crowd like tumbleweed. Ellie's hands trembled only slightly as she adjusted her veil. She didn't cry. Her jaw locked tight. She gave them no tears, no drama, no begging. Just a quiet nod, as if this too was something she could weather. She turned from the altar, heels clicking softly on the wood, and walked down the steps, alone. In the shadow of the general store's awning, Jonas Kerr watched with flinty eyes. He hadn't come to town for this spectacle. He needed grain and spare parts for the wagon. But something about the woman in white rooted him to the spot. She reminded him of ghosts, not the kind that rattled chains, but the ones that sat quiet, at the edge of your bed when no one else was left. His late wife had worn white too, not that shade though. Her dress had been simple, sewn from curtains and hope. She'd died 7 winters ago. Fever came fast and stayed long. Jonas had buried her behind the farmhouse beneath a cottonwood tree that bloomed too late every spring. Now, as the crowd dispersed, muttering about wasted Sundays and foolish women, Jonas turned back toward his wagon. But fate had a mean way of pulling at a man when he least expected it. Ellie Walker sat on the church steps alone, veil shoved into her lap like discarded tissue. She was humming, a low, tuneless sound, more vibration than melody. Her eyes were dry but red-rimmed, her spine still impossibly straight. "Ma'am," Jonas muttered under his breath, annoyed that his boots were already carrying him toward her. She didn't look up until he spoke louder. "Ma'am," she raised an eyebrow, "you here to gawk like the others?" "No." He hesitated. "Didn't seem right. You sit in there alone. Figured I'd enjoy the view before I'm run out of town for lowering the moral average." Her voice was dry as the prairie wind. "You can save your pity. It wrinkles worse than I do." He almost smiled. "I don't pity you, just figured you might be hungry." She studied him, eyes narrowing like she was trying to place him in a ledger. "You from around here?" "Outside of town. Got a farm. Ain't much. You always." "So this charming?" "No, usually worse." She snorted, stood slowly, and smoothed her ruined gown. "Well then, farmer, thank you for the courtesy, but I'll manage. I always do." He nodded, tipped his hat, and turned away. But that voice, sandpaper wrapped in silk, followed him down the street. By the time he finished loading the last of the flour into his wagon, the storekeeper leaned over the counter and said, "Ain't your business, but that woman's got out. Nothing. Not even the gold she brought for her dowry. Groom ran off with it, slipped out last night." Jonas grunted. "Shame," the man continued, shaking his head. "Folks think she's mad for trying. 60 and still hoping for a husband? She should have stayed back east, joined a quilting circle." Jonas said nothing. He climbed onto the wagon bench, reins in hand, but the words clung like dust to his throat. He looked toward the church steps again. She was gone. He passed her on the outskirts of town, walking slow but steady along the trail, dress dragging behind her like a ghost's train. He didn't stop right away. Took him a full minute before he pulled the wagon to a halt, exhaled, hard, and looked skyward like the clouds might offer advice. He turned back and called out, "You headed anywhere in particular?" She didn't break stride. "Away. That's a direction, not a place. Place don't matter. Wherever I go, they already have a story about me. Might as well be a fresh one." He stepped down. "I got a place needs cleaning. A boy needs raising. Meals to be made. I ain't offering love or romance, just a roof and an honest day's work." She stopped walking. He added, "You'll earn your keep. It ain't charity." She turned. "You always propose to women like this?" I didn't say anything. "About marriage," she smirked. "Good. 'Cause after today I'm off weddings." They stared at each other for a long beat. Two scarred, tired souls testing the silence between them. "I'm Jonas Kerr. Eleanor Walker. Call me Ellie." He nodded toward the wagon. "Well, Ellie, you ride up front or hang on back?" She climbed aboard, gathered her dress in a bunch, and settled beside him with a heavy sigh. "Guess this counts as the honeymoon." "Don't push your luck." As the wagon creaked forward, the town faded behind them, swallowed by sun and heat. Ellie stared ahead, not looking back once. Jonas glanced at her sidelong. "You cook?" "Better than I shoot." "You shoot?" "Only when it's necessary." "Huh." They didn't talk for a while. The horses' hooves provided the only rhythm. Dust kicked up in steady beats, like a slow heartbeat steadying after a long sprint. By dusk, they rolled into the homestead. It was simple: wood slats, crooked fences, a chimney that leaned slightly to the left, a porch with a rocking chair that never rocked. And there on that porch sat a boy with tangled hair and wary eyes. Benji stood up slowly, squinting against the sun. "Pa," Jonas raised a hand. "This is Ellie. She'll be staying for a while." Benji blinked. She's dressed like a bride." Ellie smiled gently. "That's because I was one, briefly. Then I wasn't. Now I'm something else entirely." The boy frowned. "You a witch?" Jonas sighed. "Benji, don't be rude," she chuckled. "Only on Thursdays." That earned a laugh. A real one. The boy stepped down and circled her like a suspicious pup. "I don't trust ladies in dresses," he muttered. "Well," Ellie said, stepping down, "I don't trust boys who don't wash their necks. We'll call it even." Inside, the house smelled of dry wood and old tobacco. Jonas showed her the guest room, small, plain, bed made of rough wool and fur. She unpacked what little she had, a journal, a brooch, and a single photograph of her. As a young woman, she placed it face down. At dinner, the silence was thick enough to spread on bread. Benji poked at beans. Jonas ate mechanically. Ellie cleared her throat. "So what happened to his mother?" Jonas paused. "Fever, years back." "And the boy?" "Found him wandering after an Apache raid. He don't remember much." Benji nodded, chewing slowly. "Pa says I showed up with bad luck and stuck around." Ellie met his eyes. "I say bad luck comes and goes. Good people stay." Benji stared a long moment, then shrugged. "You talk funny." "Good. I don't plan to be forgettable." After the boy was in bed, Jonas lingered by the hearth while Ellie scrubbed the dishes. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "I know." He looked at her then, really looked. "Why did you say yes?" She dried her hands on her skirt. "Because you didn't ask me to be young or pretty or quiet. You just asked me to help." He nodded slowly. "And I said yes," she added, "because I'm tired of being left behind." Outside, the wind rustled the porch boards. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and shrill. Ellie stood at the doorway, silhouetted, in lamp glow. "You got a spare blanket?" He tossed her one from the shelf. Their fingers brushed briefly. "Thank you," she said, voice softer now. "Get some rest," he replied. "Tomorrow's early." As she closed the guest room door, he stared at the fire a moment longer. Maybe she was too old. Maybe she was broken. But so was he, and maybe, just maybe, two broken pieces could make something whole. Outside, the cottonwood swayed, and for the first time in 7 years, Jonas Kerr thought about planting something new. Morning came cold and quiet, a thick fog clinging to the ground like regret. Ellie stepped onto the porch with a worn shawl around her shoulders and a cast-iron skillet in one hand. She stood still for a long moment, staring out at the rugged hills and tired land stretched before her. The farmhouse behind her creaked, groaned, and settled with the wind as though it too were waking slowly after years of aching silence. Inside, Jonas stirred his coffee over the stove, expression as blank as the prairie sky. He'd said few words since she arrived, and fewer still that morning. Ellie wasn't offended. The silence of men like him wasn't empty, it was brimstone packed tight under pressure. Benji stumbled into the kitchen barefoot, yawning like a cat. He stopped mid-step when he saw her by the stove. His nose wrinkled. "You cookin'?" She didn't turn. "Someone's gotta. Or would you prefer a diet of beans and disappointment?" He crossed his arms. "I like beans." Jonas grunted behind. His coffee. "You like complaining more." Ellie slid eggs into the pan with a practiced hand, the sizzle breaking the tension. She didn't rush, didn't hover. She cooked like she'd done it for 60 years, and she had. Cooking, cleaning, surviving. That was the rhythm her life had danced to long before she'd ever considered boarding a train west. Benji lingered in the doorway, watching like a wary colt. "You gonna stay long?" "That depends," she said. "How you plan on hiding my shoes again?" He looked sheepish. "Maybe. Then I guess I'll stay until you run out of tricks." Jonas sipped his coffee, hiding a grin behind the mug. By noon, Ellie had unpacked, swept the floors, mended 2 ripped shirts and threatened to throw out an entire shelf of what she called expired masculinity. Jonas had offered a grunt of protest when she pulled down a set of broken tools. She countered with a raised brow and an old army term he hadn't heard since his cavalry days. "You served?" he asked, surprised. "My brother did," she replied, dusting the windowsill. "I did the cooking, the patching, and the burying." Jonas looked at her again, not just as the woman in the white dress from town, but something older, deeper. There was no softness in her past, no ease, and yet she carried herself like a candle still willing to burn. That night, as a storm rolled in low across the plains, thunder grumbling like a drunken preacher, Ellie sat on the porch with a shawl around her and a shotgun resting against her knees. She didn't ask for permission. She just took the seat beside the door, eyes scanning the hills. "You expecting trouble?" Jonas asked from inside. "Always. That's how you avoid being surprised." He stepped out with a lantern, its light casting long shadows. "You're not what I expected. You either. I figured a man who doesn't talk much must be hiding something. But you—" She paused, watching lightning crawl across the sky. "You're just empty, like a house too long unoccupied." Jonas didn't respond. He simply stood beside her and watched the storm roll over the land. Benji peeked out the window, eyes wide. "Are you a witch or a soldier?" Ellie looked back at him. "Depends on the day, sugar." The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that was both strange and natural. Ellie made herself part of the house, not as a guest, not as decoration, but as a necessary force. She scrubbed the back porch, fixed a leaky roof tile, and wrangled the stubborn goat that Jonas had given up trying to pen. Benji was her greatest challenge. He trailed behind her at a distance, silent one moment and sassy the next. He asked too many questions. He stole her hairbrush. He put a toad in her washtub. Ellie responded not with anger, but with a kind of amused patience. She'd seen worse tantrums from grown men with broken ribs. One morning, she found him trying to read from a tattered book by the fireplace, lips moving clumsily around the words. "You like stories?" she asked. He shrugged. "I like the ones with shooting. I like the ones with survivors." She sat beside him and picked up the book. Her voice was steady, warm, and the words seemed to settle in the space like dust motes dancing through sunlight. Benji didn't say thank you, he just listened. Jonas watched from the doorway, arms crossed, unreadable. That night, after the boy had gone to bed, Jonas leaned against the hearth. "You've done more for him in a week than I managed in 3 years. "You gave him a roof," Ellie said, "a place to grow." "He's afraid to." "So are you." Jonas stared at the dying fire. "I buried my wife here. Figured I'd die here too." Ellie stood slowly. "Well, I ain't here to replace her, but I won't let either of you rot while waiting for ghosts." He met her eyes. There was no challenge there, just truth. And for Jonas Kerr, truth hurt more than any knife. The next morning brought blood. Feathers littered the yard like fallen snow. The henhouse door hung open, its latch broken, and 2 chickens lay torn apart, red staining the dirt. Jonas cursed, under his breath checking the fence line. "Damn coyote. I'll get the rifle," Ellie said, already halfway to the porch. "You shoot. I'm not just a pretty face." By dusk, the sun bruised the sky purple. Ellie sat still as stone, behind the coop, rifle resting on her knee. Jonas hadn't asked her to. He hadn't needed to. She was just there, part of the defense. When the coyote came back, she didn't flinch. It slipped through the brush like a shadow, lean and hungry. The rifle barked once, clean and hard. The animal dropped without a sound. Jonas jogged up seconds. Later, breath caught short. "You, right behind the eye," she said, lowering the gun. "That's where the fear lives." He stared. "You've done this before." "I've survived more than coyotes." They dragged the body away and buried it out past the fence. Benji watched from the barn, eyes wide. "She's not just a bride ghost," he whispered. "She's a gunslinger." Ellie winked. "Only when provoked." That night Jonas made coffee and poured her the first cup. She took it without a word and sipped, staring into the fire. He cleared his throat. "You ever have kids?" "No." Her eyes stayed on the flames. "Had a baby once, born too soon. Buried him under a dogwood in Tennessee." He didn't speak, just sat beside her. "I married late," she said. "A traveling preacher. He died 2 winters in, fever." "Same as mine," Jonas murmured. They sat in the glow of shared sorrow, silence folding around them like a quilt. Benji snored lightly from the next room. Outside, the wind settled. "You miss her?" Ellie asked softly. "Every day." "Me too. But I think they'd both hate what we've become. Quiet, bitter, dead while still breathing." Jonas looked at her then, really looked, not as a woman who'd been abandoned, not as a hand around the house, but as someone who understood pain and carried it like a badge. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." Their hands brushed on the couch. Neither pulled away, but the moment passed. She stood and stretched. "Tomorrow I start on the laundry. You've got shirts that could walk off on their own." He chuckled, a rare, warm sound. "Good luck with the barn clothes." As she stepped toward her room, he called out softly, "Ellie." She turned. "I'm glad you stayed." She smiled, just a little. "Me too." When her door closed, Jonas stared into the fire again. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. It breathed. It remembered. Outside, the moon climbed high over the plains, but deep in the woods, shadows shifted. A set of eyes blinked in the dark, fixed on the quiet farmhouse. The night was calm, but trouble was watching. The morning air had a sharp edge to it, the kind of cold that felt like a warning. Jonas stood on the porch, sharpening his knife, the rhythmic scraping against stone steady and patient. Ellie watched from the kitchen window, hands deep in a bowl of biscuit dough. She had a knack for noticing things most people missed. How Jonas's shoulders tensed just slightly, how his eyes kept drifting to the tree line, how the wind had carried something uneasy since dawn. Benji, still in his nightshirt, wandered in from the hallway with sleep-clouded eyes and a wild tangle of hair. He mumbled something about pancakes and scratched his head. "There's bacon," Ellie said, flipping the pan with one hand. "But if you want pancakes, you're stirring the batter yourself." He gave her a look of deep betrayal, then shuffled to the counter with a sigh. "Men around here are spoiled," she muttered. "That's 'cause you spoil us," Benji replied through a yawn. The sound of hooves cracked the calm like a whip. Jonas straightened on the porch. Ellie heard it too. 3 riders fast approaching from the east trail. Not neighbors, too fast, too deliberate. She wiped her hands and reached for the rifle leaning against the pantry. Jonas didn't go for his gun. Not yet. He waited until the riders came into view, their horses kicking up dust like they were tearing, a scar into the earth. The lead man wore a long duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. His face was leathered, his grin worse. "Jonas Kerr," the man called, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. "Ain't it been a long time?" Jonas didn't answer. The man kept talking. "Heard you got yourself a little homestead, heard you got some help around here now." "That true?" Jonas spoke low. "Go inside, Ellie." She didn't move. The second rider spat tobacco into the dirt. "Ain't polite to keep company waitin'." Jonas's voice was steel. "What do you want, Trig?" The grin widened. "Just came to collect. You remember that little problem we had back in Prescott? The gambling debt, the man you left bleedin' in the street. That was 15 years ago. Funny how money don't care about time." Benji had crept to the doorway, peeking past the frame. Ellie pulled him back gently, whispering, "Get your things. Hide under the floorboards like Jonas taught." "You." The boy hesitated. "Now," she said, low but firm. He vanished like a breath. Back outside, Trig dismounted and took a slow step forward. His hand rested near his belt, fingers tapping just beside his holster. "I'm here to make it." "Right, Jonas. One way or another. You give me the deed or we burn this place down and pick through the ashes for anything worth taking." Jonas didn't blink. "You come here with threats, you leave with regrets." Trig chuckled. "That's supposed to be poetry." Ellie stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled in her arms like a baby she didn't plan to let cry. Trigg raised an eyebrow. This your woman? She's the one who'll put you in the ground, Jonas said. The second rider, young, twitchy, snorted. She looks like she's got one foot there herself. Ellie didn't speak. She aimed. Next one of you insults me, I put a hole in something that matters. A long silence followed. Even the horses seemed to stop breathing. Trigg raised both. Hands mock surrender. No need to get feisty, ma'am, we're just talking. You ain't talking, you're trespassing, Jonas said. Now ride on. Trigg studied them both, then gave a slow nod. We'll be back, Jonas. Don't wait too long to make up your mind. Next time we won't come knocking so gentle. The three men rode off, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Jonas stared after them until the trail vanished. Inside, Ellie lowered the rifle and took a deep breath. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from memory. Old debts, she asked. Very old. How bad? Bad enough they might come back at night, might not knock. Ellie nodded once. Then we get ready. That evening, the house turned into a war camp. Benji helped stack firewood near the windows. Ellie reinforced the barn door with scrap iron. Jonas repaired the hinges on the storm shutters and filled canteens. Dinner was fast and silent. Ellie sat sharpening knives while Benji cleaned the rifle under her guidance. You ever kill anyone? The boy asked suddenly. Ellie didn't look up. I don't count, but I've survived. He nodded, as if that answer satisfied a question he didn't know how to ask. After the boy was asleep, Jonas sat with Ellie by the hearth, the fire crackling low between them. You didn't have to stay, he said. I know. They'll come again, this time with fire. She met his eyes. Then we meet them with steel. Jonas stared into the flames. You're not afraid? Terrified, she admitted. But that's not the same as being unwilling. He looked at her, truly looked at the lines on her face, the strength in her voice, the unspoken years in her silence. You were never just a bride, he said quietly. I was never just anything. He nodded. Thank you. For what? For reminding me how to stand again. The night crept in slow and heavy. At dawn, they came. 3 riders had become 6, faces wrapped in bandanas, torches in hand. The first shot cracked through the morning like a whip. Benji was already under the floorboards. Ellie fired from the front window, hitting a rider's shoulder and sending him tumbling off his horse. Jonas opened fire from the barn, picking off a second man trying to flank. The attackers weren't prepared for resistance. They thought this would be easy. They thought the woman in the white dress was weak. They were wrong. The leader, Trigg, shouted curses, rallying the rest. He lobbed a torch onto the porch, flames licking across the boards. Ellie kicked it off with a boot and shot the man who tried to light another. Her eyes burned with fury and firelight. Jonas moved like a man possessed, reloading without pause, each shot finding its mark. But it was Ellie who turned the tide. As 2 men rushed the door, she stepped out with an axe in hand and eyes like winter storms. The first man hesitated, just enough. She swung low and fast, dropping him like a sack of wheat. The second froze, stared, and then turned to run. Trigg, bleeding from the thigh, crawled toward his horse. Jonas stood over him, revolver aimed at his head. You lost, he said. Trigg grinned, even in defeat. It's just money, Jonas. Ain't no need to kill over money. Jonas's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Ellie spoke behind him. Don't waste a bullet. Let the buzzards finish what his soul already started. Jonas stared at the man, then lowered the gun. Get off my land, he said, and tell the others this place don't break easy. Trigg limped to his horse and vanished into the hills. The silence afterward was deafening. Smoke curled from the burned porch. Blood stained the dirt. Ellie leaned on the axe, breath heavy. Jonas walked to her and steadied her elbow. You all right? She nodded slowly. I'm tired of burying things, Jonas. But if I have to, I'll bury every threat that comes to this door. Benji climbed out from the trapdoor, wide-eyed and awestruck. You're like a ghost warrior, he whispered. Ellie crouched down to his level. I'm like your ma now. That okay with you? He nodded fast. Jonas stood quietly, watching the 2 of them. Later, as they patched the porch and cleaned the blood from the steps, Jonas asked, Why'd you do it? What? Risk everything. Ellie looked up at him. Because you let me be more than a burden, more than a woman past her prime. You gave me something to defend. Jonas looked at her for a long moment, then leaned down and kissed her forehead. It wasn't a passionate kiss. It was quiet, deep, an understanding sealed by fire. That night, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars. Ellie's dress was torn, her hands blistered, her eyes heavy, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. Jonas took her hand in his. "You're not too old. Not for this. Not for us." She smiled faintly. "Neither are you." The wind shifted. Somewhere in the hills, coyotes howled, but the house was still, stronger now. Inside, Benji slept soundly, dreaming of peach cobbler and a woman who could fight like thunder, and for the first time in a very long while, none of them felt haunted. But just over the horizon, a pale cough echoed into her handkerchief, stained faintly red. Ellie looked at it, folded it, and tucked it away without a word. Not yet. Not today. There was still life left to live. The prairie was gold in the morning light, soft and alive with the hum of summer. A breeze stirred the dry grasses, bending them like a sea of whispers. The farmhouse stood sturdy now, patched, painted, and no longer sagging under years of neglect. Jonas stepped onto the porch with a coffee tin in hand and an ache in his knees that reminded him how long it had taken to get here. Inside, Ellie folded laundry with practiced care. She still moved like a woman born before the turn of the century, all economy and resolve. But her movements had slowed some. Her cough had grown sharper, heavier, and though she never once complained, Jonas heard it like a bell tolling in the background of every quiet moment. Benji thundered through the hall, a carved wooden horse clutched in one hand, hair sticking up like wild feathers. "Ma!" he shouted, breathless. "There's a crow stuck in the fence." "It's pecking mad and won't let go." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "And you came to me instead of fixing it?" "I was gonna, but he's got this mean look, like he's got a gun or something." She laughed, low and wheezy. "Fine. Let's see about your outlaw crow." She draped a shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside, boots kicking dust. Jonas watched from the porch, her silhouette framed against the sky, strong despite the illness she refused to name. She worked alongside the boy, coaching him with calm wisdom and dry wit, until the crow took off with an angry flap and an indignant squawk. Later she sat on the porch steps, wind-tugging strands of silver hair loose from her bun. Jonas handed her a tin cup. "You're good with him," he said. She sipped slow. "He's good with me." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the kind that only comes after war has been survived and peace has been earned. The peace didn't last. The news came with the preacher's wife, who arrived on a borrowed mare, her face pale and set like stone. She dismounted with a sharp motion and went straight to Jonas. "There's a new lawman in town. He's asking questions about you. About Ellie, too. Says he's here to settle things that didn't get finished in Prescott." Jonas's mouth tightened. "Name?" "Marshal Clint Harlan." The name sat in Jonas's gut like lead. Harlan wasn't law. He was vengeance wrapped in a badge, a bounty hunter made legal. He'd worked with Trigg once, long ago. If he was here, it meant someone had stirred up old ghosts. Ellie came to stand beside Jonas, catching the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like the others." "No," he said, "it isn't." "Then we handle it," she replied, eyes clear. But Jonas wasn't so sure. That evening, as the sun bled over the hills, they stood together inside the barn. Jonas unwrapped a small oiled cloth revealing his old cavalry revolver and a badge worn smooth by years of being hidden. Ellie watched him quietly. "You were law once?" He nodded. "Briefly. Until I realized the law didn't mean much out here. Justice is slower than bullets." She nodded slowly. "You plan on using that gun again?" "I hope not." Ellie reached into her sewing kit and pulled out something he hadn't seen in weeks, her wedding dress. Torn, yellowed, and patched, she had folded it neatly, kept it safe. She held it out to him. "I want to wear it again," she said. He looked at her, confused. "We never did it proper," she explained. "We live like we're married. We work like it, love like it. I want to say the words, and I want Benji to see it." Jonas stared at her, then slowly took the dress. "Then we'll do it right." The next morning the town gathered with wary curiosity. Word had spread. Jonas Kerr, the widowed settler, was marrying the ghost bride they all once mocked. The woman who'd been left at the altar was walking down the aisle again. Ellie walked through the church doors in that same dress, now mended with thread, love and grit. She walked without shame, without apology. She met every eye with the calm of someone who'd already buried their worst days. Benji stood proud beside Jonas at the altar, jacket 2 sizes too big and hair combed lopsided. The preacher's voice trembled at first, but found its footing as the couple joined hands. "You take this woman?" "I do," Jonas said, voice firm. "And do you, Eleanor, take this man?" "I already have," she said with a small smile. "But yes, I do." The rings were simple, the vows were short. But when Jonas leaned in and kissed her, the whole church held its breath. Outside, wildflowers blew in the wind and the sky opened wide with promise. But not everyone clapped. A figure leaned against a post near the livery stable, eyes narrowed. Under a dust-coated hat, Clint Harlan, the new lawman. Watching, waiting. He tipped his hat when Jonas saw him, a silent message. "We're not done." The celebration ended early. Back at the homestead, Ellie hung her dress in the bedroom and let her shoulders sag. The cough took her again, this time deep and rattling. Jonas caught her elbow, steadying her. "You need rest. I need you to listen." She sat him down on the bed and pulled a folded letter from her apron. "It's for Benji. When the time comes. Not now. Not yet." Jonas's jaw clenched. "Don't talk like that." "I'm not dying today," she said gently. "But I've known my body a long time. It's slower now, and some mornings it feels like my bones have already started saying goodbye." He held her hand tightly, rough fingers wrapped around hers. "We've still got time. Then let's make the most of it." They spent the next 2 days rebuilding the fence, fixing the roof, baking peach pies. Benji learned to ride solo across the field and shot his first arrow through a hay bale. Ellie clapped like he'd won a war, and then the law came knocking. Clint Harlan rode up with 3 deputies, each one grim and quiet. He dismounted and strode to the porch. "Jonas Kerr, I've come to bring you in." "For what?" Jonas asked. "Murder, theft, and the abandonment of lawman's duty. You left Prescott after a gunfight. That town still got holes in its walls from your war." "I left because staying would have meant more blood," Jonas replied calmly. Harlan's eyes flicked. To Ellie, "And you, conspiracy, harboring a fugitive. You helped Trigg before he died." Ellie stepped forward. "I buried him. That's the only help I gave him." Harlan's hand hovered near his holster. "You can argue all this in front of a judge, or you can resist and die right here." Jonas's voice was steady. "You know this isn't justice. This is revenge." "You don't get to decide that," Harlan said, stepping forward. That was when Benji shouted from behind the well, "Leave my ma and pa alone." He stood with his small rifle shaking like a leaf in a windstorm. Harlan scoffed. "Cute. Real cute." Jonas held out a hand. "Benji, it's all right, go inside." But Ellie had already moved. She stepped between Harlan and Jonas, her voice ringing clear. "You come here, claim your law, but you're just a man with old grudges and a tin badge. You want him? You go through me." Harlan hesitated. Something in her eyes, something calm, certain, final, gave him pause. "I don't want blood today," he said. "Then ride on." For a moment it seemed he might, but one of the deputies reached for his gun. The shot cracked through the air. Ellie fired first. The deputy dropped, shoulder hit. Harlan's eyes went wide. Jonas drew his revolver and moved like the cavalryman he once was, knocking Harlan to the ground. A brawl broke out, gunfire, dust, shouting. But the family fought like they had something worth dying for. When it was done, 2 deputies had fled. One was wounded. Harlan lay in the dirt, groaning, gun kicked out of reach. Jonas stood over him. "You lost. You think this means anything?" Harlan spat. "You'll always be a ghost with a gun." Jonas lowered the hammer. "Better than a badge with a vendetta." Ellie stepped beside him. She looked down at the man, breathing heavy. Then she turned and walked inside. She didn't say a word for hours. That night after Benji was asleep, Jonas found her on the porch, wrapped in a quilt, eyes on the stars. "You were magnificent," he whispered. "I just did what needed doing." He sat beside her, arms around her shoulders. "What now?" We live, she said. We keep going, until I can't. He kissed her temple. You'll go out fighting, won't you? She smiled. I already am. Weeks passed. The town heard the story and stayed quiet. No one came looking for Harlan. No more riders appeared. On the ridge, the farm kept on. One morning Jonas woke to find Ellie staring out the window, a piece of parchment in her lap. She looked tired, beautiful, peaceful. Jonas, she said softly, would you do me a kindness? Anything. When the time comes, don't bury me in the churchyard. I want to rest by the cottonwood, with her, if she'll have me. He took her hand and held it tightly, and one day, quietly, she was gone. No drama, no sound, just a folded letter on the table and a peach pie cooling on the sill. Jonas buried her by the cottonwood. Benji carved the headstone himself. Eleanor Walker, Kirbride, Mother Warrior. She gave us what we didn't know we needed. Years later, they still told her story in town. The bride they laughed at, the ghost they feared, the woman who took a broken house and made it a home. And sometimes on quiet nights when the wind rustled the porch boards just so, Jonas swore he heard her laugh, sharp, strong, and entirely alive.